Hello and welcome to the Blockchain and Us, where pioneers and thought leaders talk about their journey in blockchain technology, crypto assets, and the token economy. And I'm your host, Manuel Staggers. If you enjoy this podcast, please give it a top rating and review on iTunes, and feel free to follow me on Twitter at Manuel Staggers. This episode has support from Shift Crypto Security, the maker of Bitbox, a minimalist hardware wallet for cryptocurrencies. Bitbox is rock solid, compact, portable, easy to use, and designed and manufactured in Switzerland. To learn more and get your wallet today, visit www.shiftcrypto.ch. Today's guest is Olga Feldmeier. Olga is the CEO of Smart Valor, a Swiss-based blockchain company building a decentralized marketplace for tokenized alternative investments. Olga has worked for leading financial institutions such as Barclays Capital, UBS Wealth Management, and Boston Consulting Group, and she has been commercial managing partner at Xapo, one of the largest Bitcoin custodians. Olga is the producer of a series of blockchain conferences in Switzerland. She's a mentor at Kickstart Accelerator, and she often delivers talks about blockchain regulation, the tokenization of assets, and the disruption of the banking industry. And now, to the interview. Hi, Olga. Thanks a lot for making time today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
We met about a year ago when I made this blockchain interview series. And since then, I saw that the International Business Times called you the Bitcoin Queen of Switzerland. So how did that come about?
That's funny, right? To be honest, I was surprised myself. I remember I was at Consensus last week and spoke to several journalists. It's America. And as you know, it's quite different, from how things are marketed here in Europe, especially in Switzerland, which is like really, really modest and understated culture. So next thing I know, there is an article about me called Meet Blockchain Bitcoin Queen of Switzerland, right? And it's kind of like funny. And first of all, I was a little bit flattered, but also funny because actually, it's irony in itself, right? Bitcoin is a decentralized network. It does not belong to anybody, right? Even Satoshi disappeared for a reason. and actually, it would be a very sad queen if you think about it, because it's kind of like queen without a kingdom. So, I kind of laughed about it, but I think, media just love to make up stories, and this is how it came around.
Yes, it's definitely a good title to have, right? When we met about a year ago, you were still at Xapo. So what have you done since?
Well, a lot of things happened. The good one was that we were very successful with Xapo. We managed that actually, became one of the first major Bitcoin regulatory cases here in Switzerland. So, encouraged by this success, I thought we can do even more. I can do even more. So I found a great people, and we created a new company called Smart Valor. That was April 2017, right? So this is a great thing. On the back of it, the negative effect was that actually that led to complete stop of everything else. So I quit biking, I quit kite surfing, I quit skiing, basically all the fun things that I used to do before. So now I have only one hobby.
Right. Well, welcome to entrepreneur life, right? It's just how it goes. Is this the first company that you founded?
Well, as a company, probably yes. I had a lot of endeavors and challenging, ventures in my life. But I think as a company, that was the first one.
But before you started, or before you worked at Xapo, you had a traditional banking background, right?
Yeah, well, traditional, more or less, right? You see, because I'm actually, I came from Ukraine, I got this great scholarship from German government, and I was allowed to study in Germany. So for me, it was all about, getting more mainstream, becoming like them, right? So I basically, after university, I had two choices to join JP Morgan or BCG. So I decided to go for BCG, Boston Consulting Group, but still, joining the banking, the financial services group. And kind of like after 5 years at BCG, which was like really, really tough job, right? With kind of like 90 hours per week and so on. But after that, I joined Barclays Capital in London and realized that actually, if you're a consultant and you come to those banks and give them advice and you charge them something like 10,000 per day, they listen to you. If you're the same person and you come to work for this bank, saying basically the same things, but being an employee, nobody gives a damn. Nobody even listened to you. And that was, a big surprise that kind of like, said like, wow. So consulting was kind of a little bit more, privileged in that sense. And from Barclays Capital, then I went to Switzerland. And in Switzerland, I joined UBS, which is, the largest private bank, wealth management specialized bank, and one of the biggest here in Switzerland. There I was an executive director in charge of distribution in Central and Eastern Europe in wealth management division.
Cool. How did that switch happen?
To Xapo, well, that was like, I believe in 2013. I started to read about Bitcoin, and I'm very honest about it. I really couldn't get it. I was reading this stuff and that, and I remember even an article in Economist came up, like really trying to explain it, and I thought like, wow, this is like such a nonsense. and then I believe what got me really, interested, and I started to look into it. As in Cyprian banks were on the brink of default. Many of the banks stopped, paying out money, and then what happens that Bitcoin price like really expanded from something like $30 to $70 or $80, and it was like such a change. It was like for me the first time that I noticed, wow, this something, whatever currency, this digital something, has a correlation, a negative correlation to what's happening in the real economy, in banking, right? So if even that little ripple in financial system is driving the price of this something digital, what will happen if you really get in trouble, right? And if you have a war or major financial crisis, right? Currency crisis. And then that was the time like I started to really invest in Bitcoin. I bought first portion of it, right? And started to look more and more in depth into it. And then I think I was just trying to find entrance into this industry. And for me, the fortunate moment was, when was it, like probably somewhere beginning of 2015, as I met Daniel Gutenberg, who is one of the major renowned investors based here in Switzerland, but basically international unicorn hunter. A really, really great guy. And I asked him, Daniel, like if you would be me, I have this banking background, and I really would like to get into something really exciting, like Bitcoin and all this technology stuff. What would you do? And he said, like, yeah, Olga, there is a great company. Like, what's the name? He couldn't also remember the name. He was like thinking, yeah, but it was like they kind of like in US, but they have this problem with regulation and so on. So maybe, and they're thinking about coming to Switzerland to solve this problem. And then he finally remembered the name. So it was Xapo, and I have written it down. And then I was like, trying to find out who are the people behind it, what it's all about. Right. And I discovered there is a guy, Vences Cazares, which is kind of like, very famous guy over there in Silicon Valley. And there was a book written by Natal Proper called Digital Gold.
Yes.
And this book is amazing. You know this one, right?
Of course. Absolutely. I love that book.
Yeah. right? It's kind of like the early history of Bitcoin, all the people that were involved there, how this all, happened, right? How Silicon Valley got involved in this, basically then later business opportunity. And I read about Vences, and there were nice things written about Vences. So I kind of like became his fan even before I met him. and then like I was thinking, no, how can I reach out to him? I had no connections, right? So basically I wrote him a letter, and amazingly enough, 2 days later he answered to me, and probably like a week later we sat together here in Souk, in the very nice here promenade, how do you call it?
At the lake there, you mean?
Lakeside cafe. And he told me, yeah, look, we have this problem. Like we received this incredible funding from all the top VCs, 40 million. But all this doesn't help because we have like really in US this trouble of, becoming a legal company and applying to basically there is no regulation and they don't know how to deal with us. And it's very difficult to work with banking institutions. And we looked at Hong Kong and Singapore and all those countries, and it doesn't look much better there. So what we are kind of trying to do now is basically trying to figure out if Switzerland could work. So if you want and you can help us, join us. And that was amazing for me because, with my banking background, I was actually somebody who, could talk to a regulator, could talk to banks, right? But also kind of like understanding these technologies, that was also a big plus. So I started to work for Xapo.
Mm-hmm. Sweet. I saw there was this article once with you in front of a vault somewhere in a mountain where, don't quite recall what the article really was about, but I remember that picture where you stood there and said like, this is where the cryptocurrency will be stored. What was that?
Yeah, that's amazing. I used to spend a lot of days in that underground. It's actually very cold and dark there. It's not a great place to work, if you ask me.
But what was that? Was that where you guys stored the keys or for the clients?
Yeah, actually, I can't talk too much about it. I can give you a lot of details about specifically Xapo, infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But basically, the concept to securing and storing crypto assets such as Bitcoin, there are basically two concepts: so multi-sig and cold storage, right? Mm-hmm. And multi-sig is basically just about that public key is connected to several private keys, right? Mm-hmm. So for transaction to go through, it needs to be signed by several keys. So for example, a lot of companies have 3 out of 5. So 5 private keys are issued. And for transaction to be confirmed, it needs to be signed by at least 3 out of 5 keys. Mm-hmm. And many companies, such as Xapo, this is today quite a standard, right? They implement this procedure. And on the other side, there is this concept of cold storage, which basically in simplified terms means that private and public keys are generated on this, server computer that never goes online, right? This is the term called cold storage or deep cold storage, if it's like really never connected to any kind of internet or other network. So, and this is actually how this infrastructure is built today around the world. That means that you have those, offline servers, a lot of them. So each of them keeps one key, so to say, right? Mm-hmm. So in this case, 3 out of 5 for companies like Xapo, they have on different continents different facilities, like hardened facility, like, military bunker or some kind of like high security premises where they put those servers. And the only way how, information is exchanged between those offline servers and outside world is that in a completely different premise or in different room, there is other computers that is connected to internet. And the only thing that happens is that security personnel goes to that other computer, puts a USB stick there, USB sticks reads the request information, then this person is walking to the other room where the other laptop is placed that is connected to that offline server. And basically the information that travels through the USB key is basically just a request. Does this address have enough credit, for example, to do this transaction? Yes or no, right? But the private key is never transferred, right, with that. So this private key is always on those offline servers, right? It doesn't leave them, right? And with this procedure, you what you achieve is that, once you store your Bitcoins in this vault, it's called vault. What you see on the app, it's called vault, but actually it's this offline servers, right? With that, you achieve that basically the private key never touches internet, right? And if you build this kind of infrastructure, you want to make sure that those servers, that nobody can touch them. And here you can go into any length of security and depth of security you want to. And I think Xapo did a great job to make it the most secure facility of all, right? So they found this security provider in Swiss Alps, that is providing those, facilities and rooms for server infrastructure, which is, inside of this ex-military bunker of U.S. Swiss Army.
Yeah,
right?
We have a few of those.
Yeah, exactly. Switzerland is good for that. And actually, in many countries, because, since the end of the Cold War, everybody was building this stuff, right? And then Cold War was over, and all of a sudden, folks didn't know what to do with it.
Right.
So.
Well, and also I remember when those news came out, that there are whole mountains that are hollowed out in the Alps. Nobody knew about that, right? There was nobody had an idea that kind of stuff was going on, and then all of a sudden, a few years ago, those opened up, and you could go see them, and it's really quite fascinating. But that's definitely a good use for such a military facility.
Absolutely. I was, to be honest, when I first was there, I was also very impressed, because it's kind of like on the outside, you don't see basically anything. So there is entrance into this mountain. And inside of the mountain is the whole facility. And it's like three-store buildings.
It's
inside
huge
of the
inside,
mountain,
right? Like football fields.
You don't even see it, right? And these huge doors, like there is entrance from the other side of the mountains, also these huge doors through which, even airplane can be rolled in, right? And there is this detonation rooms, right? So basically built for the case, they can sustain, like, I can't remember, but basically something like 20 Hiroshima nuclear bombs, right?
Oh, wow.
So this detonation room is kind of like folding and unfolding without destroying the inner, inner buildings in the mountain, right? So that's quite incredible.
Yeah.
Of course, the question is like, do you need to go into such a length, and do you really need to have this kind of, security? I think this is great for marketing because it's so special, right? And but basically, do Swiss banks store their information in facilities like that? No, they don't, right? They have in Zurich, they have in St. Gallen, all these high security centers. Those are basically normal buildings, right?
Yeah.
Which are, less exciting to report about. But anyways, I was going there always with investors or with prospective institutional clients who would, maybe consider using Xapo as a Xapo storage solution for, securing their Bitcoin keys and so on, right? So I was always trying to explain, this security and this procedures and so on. And normally people were very impressed because, it's not just, this facility, but it's also all the procedures around it. that your weight is controlled when you go in and out. There are so many like those control doors, right? There are movement detection. There are like 3 cameras in this room. So people from Xapo watching you, people from the security company watching you. There is like all the securities that you normally see only in Mission Impossible film, right?
That's pretty cool. I mean, that was, you said 2015, right?
15,
So that
yeah.
was really quite early, I think, also with regulators back then in Switzerland. I mean, even though now Switzerland has done a lot of stuff for the whole crypto ecosystem, and we'll talk about that a little later. But back then, I'm quite sure that not many people understood what you were even doing when you said, I need a place for cold storage.
Yeah, that's true. It was a very new concept.
So you said initially when you read the white paper or when you read up on Bitcoin, you didn't really get it. And when you saw an application, right, like maybe Cyprus, those bank runs, then it kind of clicked for you. Today, right, what is one of the main attractions still of cryptocurrencies?
Well, you see, Emmanuel, I grew up in a country which, exposed people to all kind of ideology, right? So kind of like I love big ideas. I, tend myself to be very ideological about certain things. And what basically they preached, the whole brainwash in which we grew up, right, in the Soviet Union was all about equality, right? So that, that people are born all the same with the same rights and we are all equal, right? And everybody has the right to have a good life, right? And also nationality-wise, so Ukrainians are as good as Tajikistan's and everybody's a brother and sister, right?
Right.
And
comrades.
And comrades, exactly. And somehow, well, obviously it still pretty much got into the depths of my consciousness, So later on, when I started to work here for Western companies, and I joined Barclays Capital, it used to be one of the major investment banks, and you saw all those people getting incredibly rich, right, on the trading floor and driving their hugely expensive cars after their 5 million bonuses are paid. And then later it got even worse, right? I was at UBS and I saw, our division was consisting of high net worth and ultra high net worth divisions, right? And this ultra, it's basically defined as people who have 50 million plus, right? So in our division, we had something like 300 client advisors. Basically, everybody based in Switzerland, right? It's offshore banking, right? They're not in those countries. They just fly into those countries to serve clients, right? But everybody's on Paradeplatz. And I thought, like, wow, how crazy is that, right? Like this, all safety and those great investment products and all this service. There's like everything for those rich people. But there's nothing for everybody else, right? People outside of this range, and even like forget ultra, but even like high net worth. Those are normally people with 5 million plus liquid assets, right? Those are the people that for them the bank account at UBS and Credit Suisse and Co will be opened. For the people below, probably not. In many cases, not, right? So it was like, for me, growing up in the Soviet Union and seeing all this being brought up in this equality and fair society dogma, it was kind of like quite a different world. And I always thought, like, does it really have to be this way? Isn't there a way how we can change that? And I actually started to talk about it as I was with Xapo. I started to talk about Bitcoin and how Bitcoin has actually arrived to challenge the predominant, Wall Street-driven wealth-driven system. I'm not quite sure if people at Xapo liked that, but I think they were very open. And Vences and Cazares and Ted Rogers, those are probably really two of the best people I ever worked with. I really, really admire them a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a lot. I've worked a lot together directly with Ted Rogers. And to me, it was a guy like, now when I'm taking decision how I lead my people, I'm constantly thinking about him.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being because Ted is actually, he's from sports. He was part of the Redskins, so he was like in professional sports. And what I learned that people who come from professional sports, they have very strong ethics, right?
Mm-hmm.
They follow one passion, they work, they give it all to achieve something in that one area, right? And how you strive to deliver those results and how you treat everybody fairly,
Mm-hmm.
with respect. This is amazing. This is what I learned there.
Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless,
cool.
Probably, this democratization and so on was also part of Xapo ideology, because Vences Cazares is from Argentina, and we have very similar story. He grew up somewhere in Patagonia, in the middle of nowhere, and his parents weren't very rich. They had these shipyards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he is like 100% self-made man. He came from there, from poor Argentina. He made it to become one of the top Silicon Valley entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
Trusted and respected by the top VCs over there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually the real success story, because of course Americans that grew up in America and they went to a nice school and everything was there and they made it to the top ranks of Goldman Sachs. Yes, that's also a success story, but it's quite different from story of the people like Vences and me and so many people that come from nothing.
Mm-hmm.
and achieve quite something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically Vences became for me later quite an inspiration as I worked with him.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
that's cool. Are you guys still working together now with your new company?
Yeah. Like we're constantly in contact with that. There are a lot of things that happening here in Switzerland that I always refer that to a lot of people, here in Switzerland, because it's such a small country. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually quite easy to become kind of like a little bit known, right? So a lot of people remember me, for example, and they come back to me when they have question about Bitcoin or how to invest or what's the safest way to invest, to hold the keys.
Let's talk about Switzerland a little bit. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you came here right after when you were working for UBS, and with the whole Xapo project, you kind of probably became an expert in Switzerland, right? Why it is a good place for crypto. But since then, a lot has happened, right? This whole crypto valley idea and all this. How do you think has Switzerland evolved for the cryptocurrency space?
I think, what happened now within the last 3 years, in other industries, you would compare this to at least like 30 years period, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the amazing thing is that, probably this country was ready to embrace this new technology. And look, back in 2014, 15, here, Crypto Valley, who was that? It was basically kind of like 4 or 5 companies, right? There was Ethereum, so Vitalik came here and rented this house just across of our office now.
Mm-hmm.
And they moved in and they were the first kind of ICO, protocol ICO, which they ran in 2015 here out of Swiss Foundation. There was Bitcoin Swiss, there was a guy that founded Monetas, and there was Xapo. So we were basically, one of the first, so to say, founders of that notion of Crypto Valley. which was basically introduced by Johan Givers, the
Yes.
founder of Monetas.
Did you know that there was something special going on, or was it just, nobody had a clue? There was just kind of a startup vibe, or what was it like really back
No,
then?
nothing of startup vibe, nothing. I remember I was looking for offices for Xapo, and it was like really difficult because wherever I went, all the people told me, they showed me offices to rent. There were always these small rooms for 2 people where you can lock the door and nobody can hear anything. And I was like, but no, guys, I'm looking for co-working space. Like where are those old startups?
Mm-hmm.
And it appeared there is none such a place.
Yeah, that was before the time. Yeah.
Exactly, because basically here, who was here? All the hedge funds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Private equity
In
funds.
Zug, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes.
Those people that earn a lot of money, and Zug is one of the cantons with the lowest corporate tax rate. So everybody was coming here basically to save taxes, even within Switzerland, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of those people, they needed to have closely shut doors so that nobody listens, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the reason for all those small offices. And since then, several things happened. To give you an executive summary, I think the 2 biggest development were following. Number one was that FINMA decided, society as such, decided that it's interesting to look into this technology and maybe open the door a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So how this happened? First of all, there were some people raising the question about Bitcoin and what it is. And, one of the first questions that arose back then, it was kind of about value-added tax. So do we need to tax this? Is it kind of commodity or is it currency? And the first positive sign was, we don't need value-added tax on it, so probably it's not commodity.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing that came up in conversation was actually, custody of the crypto assets. It was the Xapo case.
Mm-hmm.
And we initially started to work with MME, which is today became a quite renowned company in this field.
It's a law firm.
Law firm, exactly, law firm. Well, they helped Ethereum, they had this first 1, 2, 3 cases, right? Xapo being one of the early cases, right, in this space. And they did an amazing job of helping us to communicate and to explain to FINMA, Swiss financial regulator, what it's all about, right? What is Bitcoin? What do we do with Xapo? How we are storing those private keys? How do we create them, right? What is so special about it, right? And it was definitely not an easy job, as you can imagine, right?
Yeah. That's interesting. Sorry to interrupt. I always thought that MME was just a law firm, that they did all the paperwork, made sure it's on the right side of the law. But I didn't know that they actually were quite instrumental maybe in explaining what this really is to the regulator.
Definitely. But back then it was such a new topic that, if you would hire even the best, the brightest lawyers, it was, that this conversation within FINMA and within the people that were responsible for this case, it could get just that far. And there were internally some people that just fundamentally opposed, opening of the agency toward the Bitcoin and blockchain, right? So as much as we had tried back then, it was kind of like, they reached the decision that in a certain way, what we do resembles deposit taking activity, because this private key is basically, you as a user of Xapo wallet, you don't have access to that key, right? Because the key is generated on those offline servers, right? That's the whole point, that nobody has access to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the value proposition.
So they
right?
argued that then is custody.
Yeah, they argued that because the user does not have access to his private key, so we are controlling, we as Xapo controlling the private key, that means that we are in control of the funds at the end of the day. I mean,
which means you're a
technically it's
bank.
correct.
Technically.
Which means it's a bank, exactly, right? So this is what they said, guys, like, we think you should apply for a banking license. And, and you know, for a startup, even very well funded, like Xapo back then, 40 million, it's still quite a burden, right? Because in Switzerland, you need to bring in minimal capital. It's minimal capital requirements, right, of 10 million. Plus, you know, all the stuff and all the organizational requirements that come your way. So this is like plus, you know, the legal fees and so on and so on. So you need to be able to shelf off something like 15 million, right? And it wouldn't make sense, you know, from the business perspective. So, you know, Vensis was very disappointed and everybody was disappointed. And we said like, oh, okay, we spent so much money here and time on lawyers and all this stuff, and there is no result. And he said, okay, you know what, we just forget it, you know, okay, there's going to be no Switzerland. And I thought like, wow, this cannot be, right? Because actually there's so much interest and there's so much will. And actually Switzerland is an innovation leader, right? If you look at all those international rankings, World Economic Forum ranking, it's one of the top countries in you know, openness and innovation and technologies, right? You know that, right? You know, that's your country.
It wasn't always like this. I mean, I had a startup in 1996 in Switzerland, in Zurich. And, you know, then it was still, I mean, there was definitely no co-working space available back then. I mean, there weren't even books on startup entrepreneurship, you know, easily available. And people in general didn't quite understand why somebody, you know, who's around 20 years old would want to start a company while they could just, you know, go to university, get a master's degree, and then work at a bank. And so it's quite recent that this whole startup wave, you know, swept Switzerland, and that all, you know, that also that consciousness is there. That's not, I mean, that hasn't always been the case. That maybe has just been, it just changed maybe around, I'd say around 2010. You know, that's when the first of those programs also emerged, right? I mean, before it was impossible to get any funding. There were no programs. There was just nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And so this whole drive with innovation and Switzerland as a crypto valley and as a startup country, that's fairly recent. And so I was also surprised. I mean, I hadn't lived in Switzerland for a very long time. And always when I visited, you know, after around 2010, it changed. I saw something changed and people were much more open. They tried things. And then in recent years, you know, when this whole crypto ecosystem just mushroomed, then I think it really took off.
Yes. But that's one aspect, you know, but the one that I'm probably talking about is, you know, innovation in terms of not startups, but companies, right? Switzerland has one of the leading companies in pharma space, right? In different industries, right?
Yes.
And why? Because, I mean, it's just an amazing place to live. It's one of the countries with the top quality of life, right?
That's true. That's absolutely true. You know, but that's always been, you're right. There has been a lot of innovation on a very high level. Right. There was pharma, there was, you know, precision mechanics and things like these. But that was generally not accessible to somebody who just wanted to start a company out of a bedroom. Right.
Exactly.
That was very, very hard. You needed capital. I mean, to get into the pharma business, that's capital intensive if you want to play there. So that kind of innovation on a very high level has existed for a while. But that, you know, this whole movement from starting something new and fresh from the ground up, you know, just kind of learning by doing, like you said, right? You wanted to do this in a co-work space, not in a closed office space. So that is quite new, I think.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I think, you know, also what happened is that also banking, you know, used to be one of the key sectors of economies that is, you know, contributing probably like, I don't know, 15% of GDP. So banking is very important in Switzerland. You know, Switzerland is still today one of the top 5 major banking centers worldwide in this, you know, banking center ranking. Well, very specialized one, right? Wealth management center. But still, banking is very important here. And I think what happened, back in 2008 and 9, after, a financial crisis hit UBS so hard, and it was on the brink of collapse, and, people started to think about saving UBS with public money, right? And then even worse, US government was also hit by the same wave and started, nervously look for new revenue channels, right? And then they discovered, oh, wait a little bit, like the Switzerland and all our US citizens that have their banks account there. Isn't that great way for us to get a little bit money to pay for all these bailouts?
Yeah.
and then you remember what happened with this, whistleblower case with this guy that opened all the information, that handed over the information about U.S. clients of UBS
Well,
to
there were all
U.S. government.
these data leaks at a time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just one after the next came out. I mean, it was really, I think it was kind of a data crisis. You had all these breaches of data, and I always wondered why do these people have access to these data even,
Yeah, well, today they changed the tune. Today it would not be possible anymore. They learned lessons, right? So today the access to the data is quite limited in the banks. But anyway, like back then, and by the way, the funny fact is that this guy who sold the data, who handed over the data to U.S. government, he still needed to go to the jail for revealing the secrets, right? For breaching other stuff, right? And no, basically for supporting the tax evasion, right? So because officially he was part of this organization, and since he also handed in data, US needed to put him in prison for support of this tax evasion system, right? So he spent 1 year in the jail, but then on the top of it, US government paid him a lot of money to get that data. And I don't remember, probably like 30 million.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
So basically, he earned like 30 million for 1 year in jail.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Probably.
It's almost on the level of a trader at UBS. Yeah.
That's true. But basically what happened, since, and in Switzerland, this notion of banking secrecy, it's been a big deal, right? This is how this banking center became such a large and important institution.
Absolutely.
Because for the last 200 years, all the world trusted this place. And it obviously started with wars, First World War, Second World War. This is where, money traveled here because, all the world were on the lookout for this safe place. And because Switzerland had this neutrality, right? So it wasn't involved in a war. So that kind of like became, a place where to bring your wealth, right? And after the war, after the Second World War, this kind of like really became big. So in 60s, 70s, Switzerland amassed some 10 trillion assets, offshore wealth, right? And then they didn't know how to deal with all this, tax money. Well, partially people just came not for safety. Later they came for tax reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And basically this banking grew so significantly on the back of all those developments. So as US struck in 2009 and the bank secrecy was abandoned as such, the question, of course, the banking was in total crisis here. UBS lost like from 10 trillion. Imagine it came back to like, what is this today? 2.5, 3, like really offshore assets, 4 in total.
Mm-hmm.
So more than the half of all money left this country. And this crisis in banking and like that probably was a call for redefinition of this industry. And everybody asks themselves, so what's the way forward? So of course we need to become transparent, and we need to throw away this shadow of tax evasion and so on and so on. And there were several great solutions that was achieved there. For example, with European Union, the agreement was to have this regime where you as a European Union country, France, for example, you still don't know whom this account belonged to. There is like no name revealed, but the taxes are just paid, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is a certain percentage that is just withdrawn from your account at the end of the year and paid to the source country, to the country where you're a citizen, right? Mm-hmm. And this is actually great because it gives people still this privacy that some people want for certain reasons without being involved in tax evasion.
Mm-hmm. That was that withholding tax, right? 35%
Exactly.
or something like this.
Exactly. And if you think about it, like I spent a lot of time figuring out how blockchain technology now plays into that. And basically, if you think about zero knowledge protocols, about all these new things that came up in the recent years, you could devise a system, on the global banking level involving regulator, like this global banking blockchain that will enable exactly that, that people can bring their assets here to Switzerland from any country, and they can store their wealth on those, public or private keys, so basically on their addresses. But and the banking institutions would not reveal their names, but would just reveal to those source countries the accounts that are connected to citizens from those countries, and those countries could see like, yes, so those accounts are ours, and there's so much money, and we just pay average tax of X to those countries. Mm-hmm. And those countries don't need to trust us that their government, their citizens really have that much. They can see it on the blockchain, right? It's real data. And one of the nodes that could run in the system could be FINMA. FINMA can see and have transparency about every transaction, right? Mm-hmm. Imagine the transparency of this scale. I mean, we never had this before, right?
Let's take a quick break for a message from our sponsors. Shift Crypto Security is the maker of Bitbox, a minimalist hardware wallet for cryptocurrencies. Storing your digital assets safely should be a priority, but software and phone wallets can't protect your assets from hackers and malware. The Bitbox can. Developed by a team of experts who combine Swiss pioneering spirit with a strong commitment to crypto security performance that is second to none, the Bitbox is rock solid, compact, portable, easy to use, and designed and manufactured in Switzerland. To learn more and get your wallet today, visit www.shiftcrypto.ch.
Imagine the transparency of this scale. I mean, we never had this before, right?
Yeah, it's really quite remarkable. I mean, I wonder if FINMA also sees it that way.
Yeah, I think, what is like really great about FINMA is that through all those cases, working with Xapo, Ethereum, and now with all ICOs, they developed wide expertise in this field, right? Mm-hmm. I would even go that far that I think today FINMA is one of the most knowledgeable regulators around the world. Right, they have this task force and this group of people that understand the stuff in pretty much technical details, right? And this is very important because if they understand, then they can really craft the regulation and guidelines that is appropriate, right?
Yeah, they're definitely very advanced. I mean, that's the impression I get as well. And that's what many people I speak with, what they tell me, and what they also appreciate is that, I mean, Switzerland is a small country, right? It's 8 million people, I think, living here. Mm-hmm. And it's flat. That means you can approach even, quite senior officials from governments and from regulators quite easily.
Totally, yes. This is experience that I've made. So back to the Xapo case, what happened, since FINMA said, well, you're probably a bank and kind of like that moment, it was end of 2015. Our requests started to be answered in a slower and slower pace, and it looked like this is it. And that was the moment for me to realize that, part of, lawyers and all this work that just needed to be done. We need something else. We need to create some like impact and influence on completely different level.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to ask some people here, Swiss guys, everybody, like, how do you do that? How we can create more, not noise, but to let people know what we are doing and why this is good, why they should support us.
Mm-hmm.
And some very nice people here in Switzerland, they brought me in contact with, it's called Parlamentarische Gruppe for Digitale Nachhaltigkeit, so Parliamentary Group for Digital Sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a group of people, they're all parliament members that are looking at those topics. Like back then it was all about open source software and protection of data, and they support different initiatives. So amazingly enough, they invited me to Bern, capital of Switzerland, for their regular meeting. And there I had my 10 minutes where I could, pitch my case, Xapo, and why we need support. And surprisingly enough, one of them was Franz Grüter. After this meeting, he stood up, came to me, gave me his business card, and said, I like what you guys are doing. Contact me. I think I can help you. And he left.
Cool. Okay.
And that was amazing, right?
That is cool.
And then after several interactions with him, he kind of like said that the way he sees it, that he should, submit a motion to the parliament, about requests to kind of extract the definition of cold storage from the definition of public deposit. So
Mm-hmm.
cold storage should not be part of this, public deposit definition. And he did that. He really submitted this motion to the parliament. It's amazing. I was reading this on the parliamentary website.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, something like that, if you would be in Russia or in Argentina, would cost you a lot of money. And it's called political lobbying, right? Here in Switzerland, nobody wants your money. It's really fair and democratic country.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody thinks that makes sense, they will just do it.
Yeah, correct. You can always go and talk with people. That's one of the good things. I mean, I've lived all over the world, right? In the US, in Asia, and here, this is one of the few places in the world where you can go to almost anyone and just plead your case. And if they like it, they'll say yes, and if they don't, then they say no. But
yeah, exactly.
It's as simple as what happened with that motion?
It's actually quite funny stories. So I was totally excited. I was like, Ventus, did you hear that? Like, you see what we achieved. This is like really, we're moving forward. It's going to be success. And the next thing I know that Parliament declines this motion.
Okay.
Saying kind of like, guys, we are working on this banking light, this fintech license,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to handle this as a part of this banking light. So not good, but okay. Anyway, I started to ring some more.
That was this light was a banking license, but with lower thresholds, right? Kind of like a light, in quotes.
Yes.
License
exactly.
That startups in the fintech space mainly could get.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Unfortunately, that was a big hope for me. I was actually planning to apply for this one with Smart Valor, but unfortunately, it still didn't happen. It was moved forward to 2019. So hopefully, it will come someday. But there are other solutions. Other countries around us, like Liechtenstein, came up with even better solutions. So there are alternatives today. But back to the Xapo case, basically apart from that, I started to talk to different organizations. A lot of support came. I was so surprised, for example, politician, Ständerat and parliament member Rudi Noza was super helpful and supportive. He is an entrepreneur himself. He said, Olga, it cannot be that we have this great company coming here, knocking at our doors, wanted to become a legal licensed business, and we just shut down our doors in front of their nose. This cannot be. And he and so many other people, it was like, basically for me, it was like probably 8 months of this lobbying work, But what I achieved, that we were so public then. There were news in newspapers. Everybody wrote about us. I was constantly in some interviews. And I think it became such a visible case that it became kind of difficult to just say no and whatever, right? So we came from being absolutely irrelevant small startup to becoming a quite exposed prominent case that kind of needed to have a good solution.
Yes.
But, to cut the story short, the result was then that FINMA kind of changed their decision, and they said, well, we kind of understand that it's not quite the same as banking, what you guys do, and we kind of like going to give you green light, and you can just work without banking license. You can register as financial intermediary with IML license, being supervised not by FINMA but self-regulating organization, and you can choose which one, and you can go. So that was for me personally one of the biggest achievements probably in my career. that while everybody already kind of gave up, that I still found a way to move this case forward. Right? And it became one of the first biggest regulatory cases for Bitcoin as such worldwide, but of course for Switzerland. And that gave me hope and understanding, that actually here in this country, if something is right and good for society and good for business here, there is going to be so much support, right? And you can go to those people. You can even sign a, public petition. If you have 100,000 signatures, Parliament has to look at it and decide what to do with it. It's direct democracy, right? If people want, they will need to decide. It's amazing, for me coming from Soviet Union, where you doesn't count, you as an individual have absolutely no rights, no voice, whatever, right? So it's been a very oppressive governance. So for me, it's like really magic. It's magic country. I underestimated it. As I came here 5 years ago, I didn't even realize that it's such a great opportunity that you can talk to politicians, you can talk to regulator, to authorities, and they really going to look at your case. And if it's good and if it's good for society, good for people, they will support you.
With Xapo, this I think was a really good success, but at the same time, this whole banking license light, right? It was just postponed to 2019. And I mean, if you just put 2 years, if you put something on hold for something like 2 years, that's just an eternity for the crypto space.
That's true.
Have you seen the regulators here, and FINMA maybe in particular, have you seen them maybe also pick up the pace a little bit now that this space is moving so quick?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. For postponing banking license, there are good reasons of a technical nature. But apart from that, they moved forward. There are like several things. For example, as an exchange, earlier you would have only 7 days that you can hold deposits on your money on your platform. But if it's not traded and changing, into some other assets, you would need to have a banking partner to hold these funds with, right? So they extended this from 7 days to 60 days, which is, great for exchange business, right? Which is going to be very beneficial for us too. And also, they moved forward quite well with ICO stuff, with ICO regulation.
Yes.
So as ICO wave came up, probably became big beginning of the last year, 2017, yes. So basically last year, probably around, if you kind of like very broadly, divide ICOs in two groups, less good, like poor ICOs, and like really great projects. in total last year, something like 5.6 billion was raised in ICOs worldwide. So probably the half of them were really great companies. And from that half, approximately 1/3 were conducted through Swiss companies. So Switzerland kind of magically became this hub for ICO business, right?
Well, Zug in particular.
Exactly. That's true. So basically, through Swiss companies last year, around $1 billion US dollars was raised. And then, of course, issue came up like, what is this like actually? So, of course, it was all structured. In many cases, it was like plain utility token or payment currency like Ethereum. But as this phenomenon grew, there were people that were constructing that were coming not from blockchain space, from people building social media business and film business and food industry and whatever, right? So the question came up, is this like really everything like the same utility token, or how do we deal with that? And you have to keep in mind that this whole thing was going on here on the background of US and China prohibiting ICOs, US Security and Exchange Commission taking a really tough stance on ICOs, shutting down ICOs, starting investigation in many cases, pulling company to pay back money to contributors, right? All this scary stuff, right? Where a lot of great US companies said, oh, no. We don't want to deal with that. We'd better go to Switzerland.
Yeah.
So as FINMA started to receive more and more requests and started itself investigating a lot of cases, it became obvious that this space needs some kind of, well, if not regulations, then at least guidance. And this is what they did. They were working for many months on those ICO guidelines, which were issued this February, earlier this year. And I wrote and commented a lot in newspapers and television on this point. But a key takeaway is that, those guidelines, they're actually great because, first of all, they give a clear definition, what kind of tokens are out there, what are the consequences, legal consequences of, issuing these different types of tokens. And I mean, underline the advantage of doing this in Switzerland is that, even if your token is a security token, it's not a big deal. Of course, you need to issue prospectus, right? We have this prospectus requirement, and you need to lead, the ledger or the registry of your shareholders and several other things. But this is like everything is doable without such a huge burden on your resources, right? And this is why, I think Switzerland and FINMA, it's actually interesting. So there is this ICO guidelines, but there is also like introduction to the ICO guidelines. And in this introduction, Mark Bradson, who is, the head of FINMA, he says that the purpose of these guidelines is to create an environment in which legitimate innovator can, conduct their funding and issuance of their token in a legitimate, compliant way. Right? So he's doing the statement that, yes, we want to have to create this, legal environment for this, but only like for really legitimate players, right?
Yeah.
So this is a sign, this is a direction, that FINMA is given, that they want to establish Switzerland to become, kind of like premium quality space for this, right? They want to enable this innovation, but without compromising investor protection and anti-money laundering prevention, right?
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic.
And this is actually great. This is exactly what we need, because look at the ICO space. It was like 1,000 ICOs last year. This year it's going to be, I don't know, maybe like 4,000 or 5,000, right? It's such a massive field, like this global crowdfunding enabled by cryptocurrency, enabled by smart contracts. It's becoming so big. It's totally eclipsing all what we've seen so far in venture capital industry, right? And the space is now desperately in the need of quality and this quality stamp. So who's going to give the quality stamp? Why not Switzerland, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The country that was always the quality in banking.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that has been the big discussion too with fintech, right? When that came up, all the
Exactly.
entrepreneurs in Switzerland, they said Switzerland could be the leader in fintech if only they understood, right, how to deal with it and how to regulate it. They try to push it into the same framework that the big banks have, and it's all the disadvantages that you mentioned, right? It's too expensive, it's too slow, people don't understand. And now I think they really learned from that fintech debacle in a sense, and really moved forward with ICOs. I think it's a very, very clear guideline. And, of course, they don't have all the questions answered, but at least there's processes to learn about how to do it. And that I think is really quite cool.
So to summarize this topic, I think, as a Swiss banking secrecy is falling away and the question of redefinition of this banking centralized, the obvious answer is it should be about innovation, new technologies, and so on. And if approached in a proper way, Switzerland can become again one of the leading financial centers, but not building on bank secrecy, but building on innovation, on technology. Because now with blockchain, what is happening, we are creating the new infrastructure layer for financial services. And cryptocurrencies, I mean, they are emerging as a new reserve currencies, right? So the countries that will be open to that innovation has a good chance to becoming this global, innovation hub in the fintech space, right? So it's a huge opportunity, and I think everybody in Bern understands this, right?
Yeah, good.
It's just very, very challenging thing to do because you're walking this very fine line how to enable this regulation, innovation on one side, without compromising protection of investors and protection, like how the industry works today, right? So it's I don't envy people at FINMA. I think it's a very challenging task, and I hope they will figure out the proper way forward.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, just today I was writing an article about regulators. The title of the article is "Regulators are just as confused as investors." And it's true, right? I mean, there's so much nonsense in this ICO space, and it's very hard to find out which the good ones are. I mean, it's pretty easy to find out if a token is a total scam, but to find the good ones, that really takes a lot of work and a lot of understanding.
Yes, that's true.
So you're also working on an ICO for yourself.
Well, actually, to give you a little bit background on this one, like as ICO wave rolled here through all the Zug cafe and bars, and you would hear this word everywhere. Of course, we also started to engage in this field, and initially we just, provided some advisory services to ongoing ICOs. Here we were, opening companies, helping to open companies, foundations, helping people to write their white papers, and so on and so on. At a certain point, we understood that, actually advisory is interesting business, but what the space needs is basically, somebody who solves these regulatory issues, right? The same what I did for Xapo, but now for this ICO space, right? Who's going to solve the problem of tokens being raised and being issued and funds raised in a compliant way? Who's going to solve the problem when this token becomes not just a utility token, but security token? And how and what are the opportunities that are around, issuance of this on this global peer-to-peer platform, right? Enabling, direct flow of capital, enabling smart securities, right? Securities issued in the form of token governed by smart contracts. I mean, that's such a huge, interesting space that is not yet there, right? That some banks are working on and some, stock exchanges are working on. But there is so much space. It's like complete new cosmos, right? And I thought like it's going to be also quite challenging in terms of regulation. So how do we deal with that when the token becomes a security token and you still want to distribute it on a global scale? And how do you, comply with investor protection and investment suitability guidelines, right? How we can, for example, tokenized venture capital fund, right? Or private equity or any kind of illiquid alternative investments, right?
Mm-hmm.
How we can create, this fractional ownership that can be exchanged in a seamless, simple way over the blockchain, but done in a legal and compliant way. So this question, actually, today nobody answers that. There are no answers. Like 90% of exchanges, they have either no legal status or they operate in these, shady countries that don't require them even to register or do KYC. Like today, exchange business is really, really like cowboy space that, people are doing some kind of stuff and there is no responsibilities.
You mean the cryptocurrency exchanges?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there's a few that are pretty reputable, right?
Few, yes, but few, right? Few.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's still a big space, right? I mean, you mean all the OTC stuff that nobody knows about and those things?
Exactly. Yeah, and you see, like, this has started to change. So Japan got more tough and US started to require registration from cryptocurrency exchanges, right? But I think here in Switzerland, like there are still so many question marks. There is no regulation, no law, no rules how to deal with all this stuff. Imagine we will have all these real assets tokenized in the form of the token. So basically we see ourselves, we're building, a marketplace for tokenized alternative investments, which means, we are looking at two categories of products. First is like crypto, like really crypto, top 5 cryptocurrencies, ICOs, and crypto hedge funds, or maybe even tokenized, gold. So the stuff that is already on the market. Mm-hmm. And the other category is something that doesn't exist today. This is kind of like tokenized alternative investments, such as, tokenized real estate, tokenized private equity, tokenized venture capital. And of course, the complexity of the second one is quite challenging, right? Because we don't have it, something like this today. There's no examples. Nobody ever tokenized venture capital. And there were very few examples of like really crowdfunded tokenization of real estate. This is coming. That's going to be a huge topic. And, we decided that it doesn't make sense to be in the process of, creating the structures and the process of tokenization of all those different assets. It much more makes sense to specialize to be in just a platform, just an exchange where people can come and bring their stuff, right? So they will have all these different assets from ICOs to venture capital companies, but all of them will need key components. All of them will need people who will write their smart contract, people who will onboard their investors and do KYC and all the legal stuff. They will all need an exchange that has a legal status and can really distribute their token in a legal way. And they will all need, some kind of like due diligence and quality process that will give them credibility.
One question, just to go back, before you said you have the top 5 cryptocurrencies as well. Mm-hmm. That means you'd make, for example, is it that you would make a synthetic Bitcoin token on the Ethereum blockchain, for example?
No, I don't think anybody needs that. Like some banks are doing that, but that's just a legal wrap around it. But I mean, just having, integration with other crypto exchanges and offering Bitcoin and Litecoin and, the top cryptocurrencies. We need to do this, not because I'm so excited about crypto exchanges. I think this is actually, it's not over, but, there are businesses that have been doing this for the last 7 years. So I'm not so excited about being a crypto exchange, right? It's basically it's becoming utility. But we need to have also cryptocurrencies because, this is how people come to our platform. So the idea is, that basically the key mission, as I see it for ourselves, is enabling access to the best breed of finance, to alternative investments, to best crypto hedge funds through the cryptocurrency doorway. And the higher mission is, I define it as democratization of access to wealth. And if you think about it, this combination of cryptocurrencies, today you can anywhere buy Bitcoin. It doesn't matter where you live, in China, in Russia, in Indonesia. You can meet with people in the local cafe, you can meet them through localbitcoins.com, however you want. There are also new devices and premises, right? And you can get hold of this cryptocurrency. And with that, you're out of your country, right? You can go anywhere, right? It's a global network, completely outside of the banking system. So you can come to our platform with your Bitcoins. You can transfer as Bitcoin, Ether, whatever. And from there, it's one click of a button. You can transfer it into Swiss franc, or you can transfer it into any real estate coins that is currently, listed or going through initial listing. You can invest in real estate. You can invest in venture capital companies. You can invest into crypto hedge funds, wherever you want, And this freedom of choice and this global access, but still being a legal, formal company, and that who is responsible for that, where your money lands when you're somewhere in conversion from that asset into the other. I think this is something that there is just no value proposition for something like that. It doesn't exist today, right? And through opening this investment opportunities to the world, to people, no matter where they're from or where they are living, in which country, right? This is democratization of banking and wealth management. I think this is, like, for me personally, now my story, coming from Soviet Union, living through hyperinflation, having lost everything, being very poor myself, and looking at this rich world and this, privileged Swiss offshore banking, which gives you safety, but only if you're rich. Like, for me, I decided that's going to be my mission for the rest of my life, right? This is what is worth giving time away from my kids, away from my family. This is the only thing that is worth doing. That's and I think like a lot of people that were early investors in this space, they become very rich and they're looking for ways to diversify in this space. Like, it was cool to keep Bitcoin if it's kind of like 10% of your wealth, but if it's turning into 90% of your wealth, you might be very well advised to diversify it a little bit, right? So I see a lot of, like, I myself from banking, and I see a lot of use cases and a lot of requests, and I understand, how you can, on one side, democratize the space and give people opportunity to have access to legitimate platform and legitimate investments, right? But also on the other side, how this opportunity gives us way to build completely new financial institutions, and at the end of the day also make a lot of money with this, right?
As an entrepreneur, who is your role model?
Well, I think it's Wences Kazaris.
Are there others?
Others, yes, it's always like they come and go, right? So you meet those people, they inspire you, and then they leave your path and you forget about them, right? So I think apart from Wences, I have several friends that are also entrepreneurs that went through the hardship, fight it, were flat on their face, picked it up, fight it more, and became very successful. In fact, one of our initial supporters, and he's a contributor and investor in our company, who's Marcus Rinder. He's basically also part of our advisory board. He's exactly this kind of guy. He's from Austria, he started his company some 12 years ago. He built it from scratch, being one of the first payment gateways for credit card transactions. He sold it several years ago to the huge American company for a large amount of money. And he's just so cool, you know. He went through all this hardship. He built up. It wasn't easy. They couldn't pay salaries sometimes to employees. And you know, it made him even stronger after that, right? And now he's looking at us and we're starting this and he's supporting us. And I just, you know, I feel very privileged to be able to work with those people and being supported by them, right? It's
Cool.
amazing.
What's your advice, you know, for others who also maybe want to follow that path and start their own company?
Well, you know, Manuel, I think there never been a better place to do that. Better place here in Switzerland and better time. Why? Because you see, you have with internet and, you know, with all this global workforce, you have access to resources in a way that was never possible before, right? And in terms of, you know, expertise and workforce. But also what you have today is this incredible opportunity also to come up with a great idea, to pull great people around you, and to raise funds for that. And actually, this ICO for us in Europe, it's an amazing opportunity. We were always so caught up from investment, right? Here in Switzerland, but basically everywhere in Europe. We were speaking about, you know, this funding gap of 30 billion, I guess, per year, right? That we kind of like, we cannot fund with own resources coming from Europe,
that
right?
was a huge issue always, yeah, absolutely.
Right. So look, now this money is all coming through ICOs, right? You can raise funds from all over the world, right? So I think people that understand how unique is this time. So we have the technology arrived, blockchain, AI, all those technologies that you can build amazing businesses on the top of this technology. You have this global workforce and you have funding, right? I mean, that's like perfect, you know, crossroad, you know, that you can build on the top of. Plus, here in Switzerland, we have regulators that is open to this innovation and that you can talk to, right? So I think it's unique opportunity, and I'm so thankful that this is happening during my short lifespan.
You know, I often speak with entrepreneurs, and I think what entrepreneurs need maybe more than anything else is encouragement, because so many people believe they cannot do it. You know, it's for others to be successful as with their own companies, but you know, oftentimes they just don't have the confidence to believe that they can also pull it off.
On this one, I would disagree, because I think, you know, the amount of confidence in your own, what you can achieve and what you can do, it's so big that you need to pull through all of those hurdles. Like, you know, in a startup, you can you can have a heart attack every day because something doesn't work out. So you need not just a little bit confidence, you need tons of confidence. And if you're not born and raised this way, you know, no matter how much encouragement and great people you have around, it will not be enough. So it's basically, you know, a little bit like the culture and family in which you were brought up, or even your character. So the combination of both. So you really need to be like 100% sure you can do anything. The sky is the limit. And you know, like, this is not something that you can choose. You're either this way and you were blessed with being raised this way. You had supportive families or parents or people that trusted in you, or you don't, right? So encouragement is good and useful, but it's part of it, right? Sorry, I needed to disagree with you at something, right?
Maybe it depends on kind of entrepreneur too. I mean, I worked a lot with entrepreneurs in academia, and they often have analysis paralysis, where they study something for the longest time and even write a PhD about it. And then, you know, 5 years down the road, maybe they hope that they can do something. And it's just, I think, you know, you just have to do it. Just do it. Start something, see what happens.
Absolutely. And it's the same true as business model. You know, like some people, when they listen to me, they say like, oh, Olga, I have a feeling like you guys maybe didn't figure it out like completely. So there are so many assets. So which asset you're gonna tokenize first, second, third? And I used to feel also quite uncertain about it. And I was like, oh, really? Do we know enough? And then I figured out, yes, we do know enough. Because I remember the times at Xapo we were, trying to support, this in-game payments and this micropayments. And there was a times that we really believed that the future of our company licenses micropayment. But then next thing that happened, like Bitcoin failed to scale and the transaction fees exploded, right? Which completely killed all the idea of micropayments, right? And you as a company, and I saw this shift, right? So that you kind of like need to shift from one idea to the other and kind of like, find your way around it. Or even listening to Coinbase founder, like he actually thought about Coinbase being completely something different than what it became. And it taught me the lesson that you don't need to worry that much. You don't need to have to figure out what you're going to do in 3 years and what is a 3-year rollout plan. You just need to start going into the directions that, kind of already showing promising signs. And you will figure out along the way, but you will be able to figure out much better than the people that still stand outside and watch. So it's always better to jump and be in the game, because you will have so much deeper insight on what's happening and what's the right way to pivot your business model than all the people that, think like, oh, it's still not clear enough. I'd better watch the space a little bit longer and then I know what to do.
Yes, then you'll definitely miss it if that's how you approach it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And with this platform, we need a place, we need an exchange, we need a place for these tokenized assets, for security tokens, right? And prerequisite is that you have a regulator with whom you can talk and have engaged in this conversation and who is open to enable this innovation, right? And while we're building global business, being based here in Switzerland, I think it's one of the core competitive advantages.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you sometimes get criticism if you are so open about your vision and how you want to achieve success with your company?
Oh, yes, a lot. We get, attacked on all the different levels, right? Some people say, yeah, but how are you going to build this company here in Switzerland? Everything is so expensive. And that's true, right? We cannot afford developers here in Switzerland, right? Because good blockchain developers that maybe was working for Google 5 years, he's like probably at 250,000 K. And we just cannot afford it, right? So now we have all our development staff in Poland and in Buenos Aires and all those faraway places. And if you would ask me, is that perfect business model for me? No, I hate it. I would love to have people here and talk to them every day. But it's just, it's a global competition and we need to be very cost efficient.
Yeah.
So if we become very expensive, then we will need to charge also expensive fees. And this is not how you gonna win the global competition, right? So there are a lot of question marks still around it, right? How do you create this, distributed organizations that is still powerful and fast and efficient? But again, the same answer, I think we will figure out along the way.
It's really a brave new world. And I think the only way to explore it is to just do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Did I forget to ask anything?
Oh, there are so many topics. We could talk with you probably the whole night. We would just need to have another a bottle of red wine and sit a little bit closer.
Absolutely. It's really fascinating. I always love to listen to you when you describe what you want to do, also at conferences or at events when you speak. I think it's always, you're a very good storyteller and that's, It's very important, right? Because this is such an abstract space. And, I think we need to make this space more accessible. And the way you do it is with good stories.
That's true.
Thanks so much, Olga, for taking time today.
Yes, thank you, Manuel.
Thanks so much for joining us today. More info on our guest and our sponsors is in the show notes of this episode and on the podcast website, theblockchainandus.com. To help people find this podcast, it's important that you download, subscribe, and give it a top rating and review on iTunes or on the podcast platform of your choice. I'm Manuel Staggers, and I thank you very much for listening.